Ethan Carter's life was a study in contrasts. A decorated military veteran and dedicated city official, he had always prided himself on discipline, honor, and a deep-rooted sense of community. After years of service, Ethan sought refuge in a quiet suburban neighborhood where his modest, yet charming home was more than just a building. It was a sanctuary, a testament to his hard work and perseverance. His days were spent meticulously restoring classic cars in his small but well-equipped garage, a passion that offered him a tangible connection to a bygone era of American craftsmanship and simplicity. The pride he felt each time he polished a vintage fender or adjusted a time-worn engine was matched only by the care he took in maintaining the peace and order of his community. This community, however, was under the iron grip of an overly zealous homeowners association, helmed by none other than Kerren, a woman whose self-appointed title of HOA president had become synonymous with uncompromising control. Kerren's reputation was built on a foundation of strict rules, arbitrary fines, and an unyielding attitude toward any homeowner who dared deviate from the association's often questionable standards. Her cold, calculating eyes missed nothing, and her presence was as much a part of the neighborhood as the meticulously trimmed hedges and uniform lawns. Ethan's prized classic car, a gleaming '67 Mustang with meticulously restored chrome details, was parked in the designated spot outside his driveway. This spot wasn't just a parking space. It was a symbol of the order he maintained in his life. One cool autumn morning, as the neighborhood began to stir, Ethan's peaceful routine was shattered. While checking on his car, he noticed Kerren approaching with measured, deliberate steps. Her gaze was fixed not on the immaculate condition of his car, but on the way it was parked. "Mr. Carter," she said in a tone as crisp as it was accusatory, "I must remind you that your vehicle is not in strict compliance with our community parking guidelines." Taken aback, Ethan replied calmly, "I'm certain it's in the proper space. I've always followed the rules exactly." Yet Kerren's response was swift and inflexible. With a smug smile, she produced a thick envelope from her perfectly tailored handbag. "This is your first and final warning," she declared, thrusting the notice into his hand. The document was replete with bureaucratic jargon and ominous threats of fines for aesthetic violations and a supposed breakdown of community order, all terms that baffled Ethan, who knew full well the written rules did not mention any such infraction regarding a parked car. Inside his home later that day, Ethan paced through his study, the envelope pressed against his chest as he wrestled with a growing sense of injustice. This wasn't merely about a parking spot. It was about his right to enjoy the sanctuary he had built over the years. His home, his beloved garage, and that vintage Mustang were reflections of his dedication to both his craft and his personal freedom. The absurdity of being penalized for a misaligned parking spot under rules that were so loosely defined left him both perplexed and enraged. In the quiet moments that followed, as he reread the notice and combed through the community bylaws, Ethan realized that this confrontation was the first salvo in a campaign of intimidation. Kerren's overreach was not a one-off incident. It was a harbinger of a broader, systematic abuse of power, a battle that would force him to stand not just for himself, but for every homeowner whose personal freedoms were being trampled by an arbitrary authority. The morning after the confrontation brought a storm of uncertainty and bureaucratic harassment that Ethan had never before encountered. He awoke early, determined to resolve the situation through proper channels, only to find a thick envelope taped to his front door. Inside, a notice detailed a $750 fine levied for repeated violations of community parking and aesthetic guidelines. The language was coldly official, intended more to intimidate than to inform. No clear instructions were given on how to correct any supposed error, only a threat of further action. Ethan's first impulse was to verify the legitimacy of the fine. As a city official well-versed in local ordinances, he immediately recognized that the HOA's authority was limited by law. "This is an abuse of power," he murmured, mentally reciting the legal precedents that would support his defense. Without delay, he began drafting a formal letter of appeal, outlining how he had adhered strictly to the documented rules. Stepping outside with his letter in hand, he was met by the familiar sight of Kerren standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, her eyes brimming with self-satisfied authority. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said, her tone oozing condescension. "I trust you received our notice?" "Good morning, Kerren," Ethan replied steadily. "I did receive it, and I intend to address it through the proper legal channels." His tone was respectful yet firm, a clear declaration that he would not be bullied. Kerren's smile deepened, though it failed to reach her eyes. "The rules of our community are clear and apply to everyone," she insisted. Her words left no room for debate. It was evident that for her, there was no discussion, only absolute compliance. As the day wore on, the pressure on Ethan mounted. Just as he was gathering the necessary documents, a pair of inspectors arrived unannounced at his door. Their presence was clinical and detached, as they began scrutinizing every inch of his property, from the alignment of his car to the landscaping. "We're here to inspect your property for potential violations," one stated in a monotone voice. Ethan's frustration simmered behind a calm facade. Each minute the inspectors spent measuring his parking spot was an attempt by the HOA to build a case against him, a case that he knew would crumble under legal scrutiny. After their departure, he spent the rest of the day meticulously organizing his records, reviewing local ordinances, and preparing for a meeting with the zoning board. The fine was not merely a monetary penalty. It was a symbol of an encroaching tyranny that threatened to invade the very sanctity of his personal space. Whispers soon began to circulate around the neighborhood. Some longtime residents, equally frustrated by Kerren's draconian measures, expressed their solidarity, while others remained silent for fear of becoming targets themselves. An elderly neighbor confided that she, too, had received unexplained warnings for trivial infractions. The community was beginning to see that Kerren's interpretation of order was little more than a guise for power and profit. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan composed an email to the local zoning office. In his correspondence, he detailed every interaction, every unexplained fine, and reiterated his firm belief that the fine was both unjust and illegal. Even as he pressed send, an uneasy feeling lingered. This was not an isolated incident. It was the opening move in a battle that would soon test the limits of community tolerance and personal freedom. In the days following the inspector's visit, an unsettling pattern began to emerge. The normally placid hum of the neighborhood was now undercut by an undercurrent of anxiety and whispered grievances. Rumors spread rapidly among the residents, whispers of neighbors being harassed and fined for infractions that made little sense. It wasn't long before Ethan realized that Kerren's relentless campaign of intimidation was part of a calculated effort to control the community through fear and arbitrary penalties. One late evening, as Ethan pored over the local zoning regulations in his study, a timid knock at his door revealed Mr. Thompson, a longtime resident known for his cautious nature. With a conspiratorial glance over his shoulder, Thompson confided in a hushed tone that several neighbors had been subjected to similar treatment. "It's as if Kerren's making up rules as she goes," he said, his eyes darting nervously. "I've even heard she's been diverting HOA funds for personal expenses. I can't say how much of it is true, but it's enough to make everyone uneasy." This revelation ignited a spark within Ethan. Determined to uncover the truth, he began a discreet investigation. He started by meticulously recording every interaction with the HOA, photographing notices, noting inspection dates, and saving every document related to fines. His goal was not only to defend his rights, but also to expose the systemic abuse that was slowly choking the community. It didn't take long for Ethan's efforts to bear fruit. Hidden among internal financial records that he managed to obtain from a reliable source, he discovered alarming irregularities. Large sums of money were being funneled into projects that had never been approved by the community. Even more damning were receipts for extravagant personal expenses, luxurious dinners, and invoices for renovations that bore no relevance to communal upkeep. Each piece of evidence painted a damning picture of misappropriation and corruption, proof that Kerren was using the HOA's power to line her own pockets. At the next neighborhood meeting, held in a cramped community center with flickering fluorescent lights, Ethan laid out his findings before a packed audience. His presentation was methodical, a timeline of events, financial discrepancies, and testimonials from other residents who had been similarly harassed. "This isn't about a single parking spot or a minor infraction," he declared. "It's about a deliberate abuse of power that's draining our community of its spirit and resources." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Even some of Kerren's most loyal supporters looked uncertain as board members exchanged troubled glances. In hushed tones, one fair-minded board member remarked, "Perhaps we have been too trusting." The seed of dissent had been planted. Kerren, however, remained defiant. In a public statement following the meeting, she accused Ethan of fabricating evidence and misinterpreting community guidelines, portraying him as nothing more than a troublemaker. Her attempts to discredit him only served to strengthen the resolve of those who had suffered under her heavy-handed policies. Soon, Kerren escalated her campaign by sending additional notices citing fabricated violations, infractions that were either gross exaggerations or outright inventions. The tactics were becoming invasive, blurring the lines between legitimate community standards and the unchecked exercise of power. Every new document, every additional complaint, further convinced Ethan that this was a battle for the very soul of the neighborhood. With cameras discreetly mounted around his property and files growing thicker by the day, he prepared for the inevitable confrontation that would force the truth into the light. Each night, as he reviewed his growing dossier, Ethan could almost hear the distant echoes of justice calling him forward, a call he was determined to answer. The mounting pressure and relentless tactics of the HOA reached a fever pitch one early morning when Ethan awoke to a surreal sight. His once pristine driveway was in disarray. Heavy machinery and a team of workers were busily excavating the front of his property. The explanation given by a stern-faced HOA representative was absurd, a supposed emergency project to expand the sidewalks for improved accessibility. In truth, no such city plan had been approved, and the workers had no legal authority to tamper with private property. Furious and resolute, Ethan immediately reported the illegal activity to local authorities. Meanwhile, Kerren arrived on the scene, exuding an air of false calm. "Everything is proceeding exactly as planned," she announced to a small group of onlookers, her voice dripping with insincerity. But Ethan recognized this as another one of her manipulative power plays, a desperate attempt to enforce her vision of order by any means necessary. Seizing the opportunity to turn the tide, Ethan prepared for a public showdown. At the next HOA meeting, held in a cramped community hall with tension hanging in the air, every homeowner's eyes were fixed on the unfolding drama. Kerren took the podium with her customary forced smile, determined to project control. However, moments later, Ethan strode to the front, carrying a thick folder brimming with legal documents, photographs, and video recordings. "Today I stand before you as a concerned homeowner," Ethan began, his voice clear and resolute. He recounted the illegal excavation of his driveway, the unauthorized inspections, and most damning of all, the financial irregularities that exposed a systematic abuse of power. As slides flickered across a projector screen, detailing receipts for extravagant dinners, forged documents, and testimonies from fellow residents, the room's atmosphere shifted palpably. Board members exchanged nervous glances. The evidence was overwhelming. When Ethan calmly stated, "These actions were taken without any legal standing, violating both our community's rules and our rights as homeowners," a ripple of indignation ran through the audience. Kerren attempted to interject with rehearsed retorts, but the sheer weight of the evidence left her words hollow. One by one, homeowners recounted their own grievances, sudden fines, intrusive inspections, and unexplained visits. It became increasingly clear that the invasive practices were not isolated incidents, but part of an overarching scheme to control and extort the community. By the end of the meeting, the air buzzed with resolve. What had begun as a dispute over a parking spot had evolved into a full-scale revolt against arbitrary power. Homeowners left the hall determined to reclaim their autonomy, inspired by Ethan's courage and the undeniable proof of corruption. As they filed out, whispers of organizing and future resistance filled the corridors, an unmistakable sign that Kerren's era of unchecked tyranny was rapidly drawing to a close. As tensions reached their zenith, Kerren's tactics grew increasingly desperate and unpredictable. With her credibility rapidly crumbling and mounting evidence of her misconduct threatening her reign, she decided on one final, extreme measure to silence Ethan and reassert her authority. It was on a cool, overcast afternoon that everything came to a head. Ethan had just returned from a late meeting with a group of concerned neighbors when he pulled into his driveway, only to notice his prized vintage Mustang had been deliberately repositioned. The car, usually parked with exacting precision, now sat at an odd angle that blatantly violated the HOA's arbitrary parking guidelines. The misalignment was unmistakable, a provocation meant to unsettle him. Before Ethan could ponder the bizarre discrepancy, a sharp, accusing voice rang out from behind his car. "Your car is still in violation, Mr. Carter." It was Kerren, her face flushed with anger, eyes burning with an intensity that bordered on madness. "You think you can ignore the rules and get away with it?" she shouted as she advanced rapidly. What followed was a scene that no one in the neighborhood would ever forget. In the heat of the moment, Kerren's frustration exploded into violence. In a split-second decision, she lunged forward and, with shocking ferocity, landed a punch directly on Ethan's jaw. The blow was swift and brutal, sending him reeling backward. The sound of the impact cut through the quiet street, leaving neighbors in stunned silence. For a heart-stopping moment, time seemed to freeze. Kerren, standing over a staggering Ethan, bellowed, "This is what happens when you defy the rules." Her words were a frenzied mix of triumph and panic. In that instant, the once distant threat of bureaucratic overreach had transformed into raw, personal violence. Within seconds, the commotion attracted the attention of nearby residents. Some rushed to Ethan's aid. Others, gripped by fear, kept a safe distance. The confrontation, which had begun over a trivial parking infraction, had now erupted into a full-blown physical altercation. Almost immediately, the sound of sirens pierced the tense atmosphere. Police cruisers arrived on the scene, their flashing lights a stark reminder of law and order. Officers quickly intervened, separating the two and restoring order. Kerren was handcuffed on the spot, her eyes a tumult of defiance and disbelief as she was led toward a patrol car. Though still reeling from the shock and pain of the assault, Ethan's inner resolve only deepened. The violent incident confirmed every suspicion that Kerren was not a guardian of community order, but a desperate tyrant willing to cross every boundary to maintain her control. The altercation, captured on multiple smartphones, spread like wildfire online. Within hours, the hashtag HOA punch was trending, and a surge of public outrage demanded accountability. For Ethan, the painful punch was both an assault on his body and a catalyst for change. In that single desperate act, Kerren had sealed her fate. The violent breach of decorum was the final straw, a turning point that galvanized the community to demand justice once and for all. In the wake of the violent confrontation, the entire community was irrevocably transformed. The smartphone footage of Kerren's assault spread rapidly, igniting an outpouring of public anger and a wave of solidarity among the residents. What had once been a quiet suburb now buzzed with determined calls for justice and reform. The brutal incident not only exposed Kerren's tyrannical methods, but also served as a rallying cry for all those who had suffered under her arbitrary rule. Within days, emergency meetings were convened with unprecedented participation. Homeowners from every street gathered in the local town hall, a place that had previously hosted mundane announcements, but was now filled with a palpable sense of urgency. Standing at the podium, Ethan addressed the impassioned crowd. Today, we are not just standing up for ourselves. We are standing up against a system that has allowed one person to wield power without accountability. His words resonated, echoing the sentiments of those who had long endured fear and oppression. Emboldened by a newfound unity, the residents launched an organized campaign to dismantle the oppressive HOA structure. Petitions demanding Kerren's immediate removal spread like wildfire, and a special election was quickly arranged to restructure the board entirely. Local media picked up the story, amplifying the voices of the outraged and shining a critical light on the outdated practices of the association. In a dramatic historic vote held during an emergency HOA meeting, the community made its voice unmistakably clear. Amid impassioned speeches and fervent debates, the majority of board members, many of whom had quietly questioned Kerren's leadership, broke ranks. With overwhelming evidence of financial misconduct, unauthorized property tampering, and the violent incident now irrefutably on record, Kerren's removal was voted in a resounding, cathartic decision. As her name was read aloud as the ousted president, the room erupted in a mixture of relief, triumph, and vindication. The downfall, however, did not stop at her removal. The revelations led to a full-scale investigation by local authorities, and the HOA itself was subjected to fines and penalties for its illegal practices. The board was forced to dissolve and reorganize under strict oversight, ensuring that no single individual could ever again wield such unchecked power. For Kerren, the reversal was swift and humiliating. Not only was she stripped of her authority, but legal charges soon mounted. What began as a physical assault turned into a broader indictment of her abuse of power. Within days, arrest warrants were issued, and in a dramatic twist of fate, the self-proclaimed enforcer of community rules found herself facing the full force of the law. Though Ethan bore the scars of that fateful punch, he also witnessed the long-overdue collapse of an oppressive regime. As the community began to heal, his victory was not measured solely in personal triumph, but in the restoration of dignity and fairness for every homeowner. In the weeks that followed the public upheaval, the full force of legal accountability descended upon the defunct HOA. Local authorities, spurred on by irrefutable evidence of abuse and corruption, launched a comprehensive investigation into the association's practices. Detailed financial records, forged documents, and internal communications, all meticulously compiled by Ethan and his allies, painted a damning picture of systematic misconduct. Ethan emerged as a natural community leader. Teaming up with a dedicated group of attorneys, he spearheaded a class action lawsuit against the HOA on behalf of countless homeowners. This legal battle was not merely about recovering financial losses. It was a stand for justice and the affirmation of every resident's right to a safe, respectful living environment. The case quickly captured media attention and even garnered support from civic rights organizations determined to see corrupt systems dismantled. As the court proceedings unfolded, hidden documents were brought into the light. They revealed unauthorized expenses, extravagant personal expenditures by board members, and blatant misuse of funds. In testimony that was both measured and impassioned, Ethan recounted each violation, his calm delivery belying the deep-seated pain of months under oppressive rule. His comprehensive records and the shared stories of other residents built a formidable case against the once untouchable HOA leadership. Fines were imposed, and several board members faced individual legal scrutiny. The case set an important precedent, affirming that no institution was above the law and that transparency and accountability must prevail in local governance. For the homeowners, the lawsuit was a turning point. It signified not only financial restitution, but a renewed commitment to protecting their rights and ensuring that abuses of power would never be tolerated again. As the legal battles raged on, Kerren's personal life began to unravel in a series of irreversible, humiliating steps. Once revered by a small circle of loyal supporters, she had become the personification of every resident's worst nightmare, a living cautionary tale of power misused and unchecked pride. Following her arrest, the media turned its relentless spotlight on her misdeeds. Front-page headlines and viral social media posts recounted the dramatic moment of her physical assault, and her subsequent handcuffing became a symbol of a long-overdue reckoning. No longer was she the imperious enforcer of community order. She had become an object of ridicule and disdain. The financial repercussions were swift and severe. Kerren's personal assets were frozen as part of the legal process, and rumors swirled that she would soon face additional charges, not only for the assault but for fraud and embezzlement related to her misappropriation of HOA funds. In every court appearance, her attempts to defend herself were met with skepticism and derision, even from those who had once quietly admired her supposed authority. Her personal relationships deteriorated almost as quickly. Friends and acquaintances who had once been intimidated into silence now spoke of her in tones of disbelief and even schadenfreude. Within her own family, disappointment and betrayal became palpable. The woman who had commanded respect was now shunned, her former aura of control replaced by a bitter legacy of abuse and arrogance. For Ethan, witnessing Kerren's downfall was a quiet affirmation of justice. He had never relished the prospect of violence or public humiliation, but the dramatic reversal of power validated his tireless efforts to protect the community. Every new court document, every critical media headline reinforced the truth that no one was above accountability. On one particularly memorable day, as Kerren was forced to vacate the office that had once symbolized her power, a small group of former residents gathered outside. Their expressions, ranging from solemn satisfaction to outright glee, spoke volumes. An elderly homeowner remarked simply, "Let this be a lesson. No one is above the law." In that moment, the community's collective voice confirmed that Kerren's reign of terror was not only over, but would serve as a warning for any future tyrants. With the dust settling over a community once oppressed by arbitrary rules and relentless intimidation, a new chapter of hope and unity began. The dissolution of the tyrannical HOA had not only restored fairness, it had rekindled the spirit of neighborhood camaraderie and self-determination. Ethan Carter, now regarded as a champion for homeowner rights, often found solace on his sunlit porch. His restored vintage Mustang, gleaming in the driveway, was a constant reminder of both his personal passions and the resilience of a community that had fought for its dignity. Neighbors, freed from the constant fear of unwarranted fines and invasive inspections, began to mingle openly, sharing stories of hardship and, more importantly, of triumph. Block parties, impromptu street gatherings, and community forums replaced the oppressive silence of the past. The streets, once shadowed by the specter of fear, now rang with laughter and conversation. Even the children played freely, their joyful shouts a welcome antidote to months of tension. In the midst of this healing, a moment of unexpected humor emerged. At a local potluck, as residents exchanged light-hearted banter and recalled the absurdity of past regulations, one neighbor theatrically presented Ethan with a homemade HOA violation notice. The playful document listed ridiculous infractions like excessive joy and overwhelming neighborliness, a tongue-in-cheek nod to the arbitrary rules that had once governed their lives. Ethan accepted the mock citation with a wry smile. "You really did try," he remarked, echoing a phrase that had become the rallying cry during their darkest days. In that moment, the community shared a collective laugh, a final mic drop on the absurdity of their former oppressor. As dusk settled over the neighborhood and the first stars began to twinkle in the sky, the residents lingered in the warm glow of a renewed community spirit. They had learned that when united, even the most oppressive systems could be dismantled. The struggles of the past had forged bonds that were now stronger than any arbitrary rule. With each shared smile and every exchanged story, it was clear that the real violation, the abuse of power, had finally been rendered obsolete. Ethan, turning off his porch light for the night, felt a quiet satisfaction. The long battle for justice had been fought, and with it, a new era had dawned, a time defined by fairness, unity, and the enduring belief that no one is ever too small to stand up for what is right.